Welcome back, everybody. Fables and Fury, how are you? Hope your day is going well. I hope daylight savings time isn't messing with you too bad. Although I do like all this extra light earlier on, in the day. Feel refreshed, feel good. Anywho, let's get back to it. Let's go do some reading. We are currently on page 60 in Terry Pratchett's Equal Rites, and we're going to try for a good 10 pages today. When last we left off, Granny had recovered Esk from her borrowing adventure, and they've decided that Esk needs to be trained by proper wizards. So, we are guessing a trip to the Unseen University in the great city of Ankh-Morpork will be coming very shortly. Let's continue. Granny took some pains over her dress, selecting a black dress with a frog and bat motif, a big velvet cloak, or at least a cloak made out of the sort of stuff that velvet looks like after 30 years of heavy wear, and the pointed hat of office, which was crucified with hat pins. Their first call was to the stonemason in order to get a replacement hearthstone. Then they called on the smith. It was a long and stormy meeting. Esk wandered out into the orchard and climbed up onto her old place in the apple tree, while from her house came her father's shouts, her mother's wails, and long, silent pauses, which meant that Granny Weatherwax was speaking softly, and what Esk thought of as her just so voice. The old woman had a flat, measured way of speaking sometimes. It was the kind of voice the Creator had probably used. Whether there was magic in it, or just headology, it ruled out any possibility of an argument. It made it clear that whatever it is that was being talked about was exactly how things should be. The breeze shook the tree gently. Esk sat on the branch idly, swinging her legs. She thought about wizards. They didn't come often to the bad ass, but there were a fair number of stories about them. They were wise, she recalled, and usually very old, and they did complex, powerful, and mysterious magic, and almost all of them had beards. They were also, without exception, men. She was on firmer ground with witches, because she trailed off with Granny to visit a couple of villages' witches further along the hills. And anyway, witches figured largely in Ramtop folklore. Witches were cunning, she recalled, and usually very old, or at least they tried to look old, and they did some slightly suspicious, homely and organic magics, and some of them had beards. They were also, without exception, women. There was some fundamental problem in all that which she couldn't quite resolve. Why wouldn't Cern and Gulta hurtled down the path and came to a pushing, shoving halt under the tree. They peered up at their sister with a mixture of fascination and scorn. Witches and wizards were objects of awe, but sisters weren't. Somehow, knowing her sister was learning to be a witch sort of valued the whole profession. "You can't really do spells," said Cern. "Can you?" "Course you can't," said Gulda. "What's this stick?" Esk had left the staff leaning against the tree. Cern prodded cautiously. "I don't want you to touch it," said Esk hurriedly. "Please, it's mine." Cern normally had all the sensitivity of a ball bearing, but his hand stopped in mid-prod, much to his surprise. "I didn't want to anyway," he muttered to hide his confusion. "It's only an old stick." "Is it true you can do spells?" said Gulta. "We heard Granny said you could." "We listened at the door," said Cern. "You said I couldn't," said Esk airily. "Well, can you or can't you?" said Gulta, face reddening. "Perhaps." "You can't." Esk looked down his face. She loved her brothers, and she reminded herself to, in a dutiful sort of way, although she generally remembered them as a collection of loud noises and trousers. But there was something awfully pig-like and unpleasant about the way Gulta was staring up at her, as though she had personally insulted him. She felt her body start to tingle, and the world suddenly seemed very sharp and clear. "I can," she said. Gulta looked from her to the staff, and his eyes narrowed. He kicked it viciously. "Old stick!" He looked, she thought, exactly like a small, angry pig. Cern's screams brought Granny's parents first to the back door, then running down the cinder path. Esk was perched on the fork of the apple tree, an expression of dreamy contemplation on her face. Cern was hiding behind the tree, his face a mere rim around a red, tonsil vibrating ball. Coulter was sitting rather bewildered in a pile of clothing that no longer fitted him, wrinkling his snout. Granny strode up to the tree until her hooked nose was level with Esk's. "Turning people into pigs is not allowed," she said. "Even brothers." "I didn't do it, it just happened. Anyway, you must admit it's a better shape for him," said Esk evenly. "What's going on? Where's Coulter? What's this pig doing here?" asked the smith. "This pig," said Granny Weatherwax, "is your son." There was a sigh from Esk's mother as she collapsed gently backwards. But Coulter was slightly less unprepared. The smith was slightly less unprepared. He looked sharply from Coulter, who had managed to untangle himself from his clothing, and who was now rooting enthusiastically among the early leaves, to his only daughter. "She did this?" "Yes. Or it was done through her," said Granny, looking suspiciously at the staff. "Oh." The smith looked at his fifth son. He had to admit that the shape suited him. He reached out without looking and fetched the screaming son a thump on the back of his head. "Can you turn him back again?" he asked. Granny spun around and glared the question at Esk, who shrugged. "He didn't believe I could do the magic," she said calmly. "Yes, well, I think you've made the point," said Granny. "And now you will turn him back, madame, this instant, do you hear?" "Don't want to." He was rude. "I see." Esk gazed down defiantly. Granny glared up sternly. Their wills clanged like cymbals, and the air between them thickened. But Granny had spent a lifetime bending recalcitrant creatures to her bidding. Mean stubborn. And while Esk was a surprisingly strong opponent, it was obvious that she would give in before the end of the paragraph. "Oh, all right," she whined. "I don't know why anyone would bother turning him into a pig anyway, when he was doing such a good job all by himself." She didn't know where the magic had come from, but she mentally faced that way and made a suggestion. Coulter reappeared, naked, and with an apple in his mouth. Granny spun around on the smith. "Now will you believe me?" she snapped. "Do you really think she's supposed to settle down here and forget all about magic? Can you imagine her poor husband if she marries?" "But you said it was impossible for women to be wizards," said Smith. He was actually rather impressed. Granny Weatherwax had never been known to turn anyone into anything. "Never mind that now," said Granny, calming down a bit. "She needs training. She needs to know how to control. For pity's sake, put some clothes on that child." "Coulter, get dressed and stop grizzling," said his father, and turned back to Granny. "You said there was some sort of teaching place?" he hazarded. "Yes, the Unseen University. It's for training wizards." "And you know where it is?" "Yes," lied Granny, whose whole grasp of geography was slightly worse than her knowledge of subatomic physics. Smith looked at her, to his daughter, who was sulking. "And then make a wizard of her?" Granny sighed. "I don't know what they'll make of her." And so it was that a week later, Granny locked the cottage door and hung the key on its nail in the privy. The goats had been sent to stay with the sister witch further along the hills, who had also promised to keep an eye on the cottage. Bad ass would just have to manage without a witch for a while. Granny was vaguely aware that you didn't find the Unseen University unless it wanted you to, and the only place to start looking was the town of Uhulan Kutash. There's got to be an easier way of saying that. Let's try it one more time. Uhulan. The town of Uhulan Katash. Uhulan Katash. Sure. A sprawl of 100 or so houses about 15 miles away. It was where he went once or twice a year if you were a real cosmopolitan badassian. Granny had only been once before in her entire life and hadn't approved of it at all. It smelt all wrong. She got lost, and she distrusted city folk with their flashy ways. They got on a lift on the cart that came out periodically with a medal for the smithy. It was gritty, but better than walking, especially since Granny had packed their few possessions in a large sack. She sat on it for safety. Esk sat cradling the staff, which means kind of like holding gingerly, and watching the woods go by. When they were several miles outside the village, she said, "I thought you told me plants were different in foreign parts." "So they are," said Granny. "These trees look just the same." Granny regarded them disdainfully. Nothing like as good. In fact, she was already feeling slightly panicky. Her promise to accompany S to the unseen university had been made without thinking, and Granny, who picked up little what she knew about the rest of the disc from rumor in the pages of her almanac, was convinced they were already heading into earthquakes, tidal waves, plagues, and massacres, many of them diverse, or even worse. But she was determined to see it through. A witch relied too much on words to ever go back on them. She was wearing serviceable black, and concealed about her person were a number of hatpins and a bread knife. She had hidden her small store of money, grudgingly advanced by Smith, in the mysterious strata of her underwear. Her shirt pockets jingled with Lucky Charms, and a freshly forged horseshoe, always a potent preventative in time of trouble, weighed down her handbag. She felt about as ready as she was going to be to face the world. The track wound down between the mountains. For once the sky was clear, the high ram tops stood standing out crisp like white brides on the sky, with their... I have no idea what that word is. I'm going to have to skip it. I'm sorry. Troussseaux. Seems French. Probably trousseau. No idea what it means. I'm going to guess it's something to do with the ladies' undergarments. Good luck, kids. And the many little streams that bordered across the path flowed sluggishly through strands of meadowsweet and go-faster root. By the lunchtime, they had reached the suburb of Olhan. It was too small to have more than one, which was just an inn and a handful of cottages. And a few minutes later, the cart deposited them in the town's main, indeed, its only square. It turned out to be market day. Granny Weatherwax stood uncertainly on the cobbles, holding tightly to Esk's shoulder as the crowd swirled around them. She had heard that lewd things could happen to countrywomen who were freshly arrived in big cities, and she gripped her handbag until her knuckles whitened. If any male stranger happened to so much as nod at her, it would have gone very hard for him indeed. Esk's eyes were sparkling. The square was a jigsaw of noise and color and smell. On one side, it was the temples of the disc's more demanding deities, and weird perfumes drifted out to join with the reeks of commerce. There were stalls filled with enticing curiosities that she itched to investigate. Granny let the both of them drift with the crowd. The stalls were puzzling her as well. She peered among them, although never for more than 1 minute, relaxing her vigilance against pickpockets, earthquakes, and traffickers in the erotic, until she spied something vaguely familiar. There was a small covered stall, black draped and musty, that had been wedged into a narrow space between two houses. Inconspicuous though it was, it nevertheless seemed to be doing a very busy trade. Its customers were mainly women, of all ages, although she did notice a few men. They all had one thing in common, though. No one approached it directly. They all sort of strolled almost past it, then suddenly ducked under its shady canopy. A moment later, and they'd be back again, hand just darting away from the bag or pocket, competing for the world's most nonchalant walk, so effectively that a watcher might just doubt what she had actually seen. It's quite amazing that a stall so many people didn't know was there should be quite so popular. "What's in there?" said Esk. "What's everyone buying?" "Medicines," Granny said firmly. "There must be a lot of very sick people in towns," said Esk. Inside the stall was a mess of velvet shadows, and their herbal scent was thick enough to bottle. Granny poked a few bundles of dry leaves with an expert finger. Esk pulled away from her and tried to read the scrawled labels on the bottles in front of her. She was an expert in most of Granny's preparations, but she didn't recognize anything here. The names were quite amusing, like tiger oil, maiden's prayer, and husband's helper. And one or two of the stoppers smelled like Granny's scullery after she had done some of her secret distillations. A shape moved in the stall's dim recesses, and a brown, wrinkled hand slid slightly onto hers. "Can I assist you, missy?" said a cracked voice in terms of syrup of figs. "Is it your fortune you'll be wanting to tellin'? Or is it your future you want changing, maybe?" "She's with me," snapped Granny, spinning around. "And your eyes are betraying you, hilted goat founder, if you can't tell her age." The shape in front of Esk bent forward. "Esme Weatherwax?" it asked. "The very same. Still selling thunderdrops and penny wishes, Hilda. How goes it?" "All the better for seeing you," she said the shape. What brings you down from the mountains, Esme? And this child? Your assistants, perhaps? What is it you're selling, please? Asked Esk. The shape laughed. Oh, things to stop things that shouldn't be, and help things that should, love. Let me close up, my dears, and I'll be right with you. The shape bustled past Esk in a nasal kaleidoscope of fragrances, and buttoned up the curtains at the front of the stall. Then the drapes at the back were thrown up, letting in afternoon light. Can't stand the dark and fugue myself, said Hilda Goat Founder. But the customers expect it. You know how it is. Yes, Esk nodded sagely. Hedology. Hilda, a small fat woman wearing an enormous hat with fruit on it, glanced from her to Granny and grinned. That's the way of it, she agreed. Will you take some tea? They sat on bales of unknown herbs in the private corner made by the stall between the angled walls of the houses, and drank something fragrant and green out of surprisingly delicate cups. Unlike Granny, who dressed in a very respectable raven, Hilda Goat Founder was all lace and shawls and colors and earrings, and so many bangles in a mere movement of her arms sounded like a percussion section falling off a cliff. But Esk could see the likeness. It was hard to describe. You couldn't imagine them curtsying to anyone. So, said Granny, how goes the life? The other witch shrugged, causing the drummers to lose their grip again, just when they had nearly climbed back up. Like the hurried lover, it comes and goes, she began, and stopped at Granny's meaningful glance at Esk. Not bad, she amended hurriedly. The council have tried to run me out once or twice, you know, but they all have wives, and somehow it never quite happens. They say I'm not the right sort, but I say there be many a family in this town, a good deal bigger and poorer, if it wasn't for Madam Goat Founder's penny-royal preventatives. I know who comes in my shop, I do. I remember who buys buckaroo drops, and show enough ointment, I do. Life isn't bad. And how was it up in your village with the funny name? Badass, F said hurriedly, helpfully. She picked a small clay pot off the counter and sniffed at its contents. It is well enough, conceded Granny. The handmaidens of nature are ever in demand. Esk sniffed again at the powder, which seemed to be a pennyroyal with a base she couldn't quite identify, and carefully replaced the lid. While two women exchanged gossip in a kind of feminine code, full of eye contact and unspoken adjectives, she examined the other exotic potions on display. Or rather, not on display. In some strange way, they appeared to be artfully half-hidden, as if Hilda wasn't entirely keen to sell. I don't recognize any of these, she said, half to herself. What do they give to people? Freedom, said Hilda, who had good hearing. She turned back to Granny. How much have you taught her? Not that much, said Granny. There's power there, but what kind I'm not sure. Wizard power it might be. That explains the staff. I wondered what the bees were talking about. Well, give me your hand, child. Esk held out her hand. Hilda's fingers were so heavy with rings, it was like dipping into a sack of walnuts. Granny sat upright, radiating disapproval, as Hilda began to inspect Esk's palm. You do it, Granny. In the village. I've seen you, and teacups and cards. Granny shifted uneasily. Yes. Well, it's all according. You just hold their hand and people do their own fortune-telling. There's no need to go around believing it. We'd all be in trouble if we went around believing everything. The powers that be have many strange qualities, and puzzling and varied are the ways in which they make their desires known. In this circle of firelight we call the physical world, said Hilda solemnly. She winked at Esk. Well, really, snapped Granny. No, straight up, said Hilda. It's true. I see you going upon a long journey. Will I meet a tall, dark stranger? Said Esk, examining her poem. Granny always says that to women. She says, no, while Granny snorted. But it will be a very strange journey. You'll go a long way while staying in the same place, and the direction will be a strange one. It will be an exploration. You can tell that all from my hand? Well, mainly I'm just guessing, said Hilda, sitting back and reaching for the teapot. She looked carefully at Es and added, a female wizard, eh? Granny's taking me to the unseen university. Hilda raised her eyebrows. Do you know where it is? Granny frowned. Well, not in so many words. I was hoping you could give us more explicit directions. You being more familiar with bricks and things. They say it has many doors, but the ones in this world are in the city of Ankh-Morpork, said Hilda. Granny looked blank. On the Circle C? Granny's look of polite inquiry persisted. 500 miles away? Oh, said Granny. She stood up and brushed an imaginary speck of dust from her dress. Well, then we'd better get going. Hilda laughed. Es quite liked the sound. Granny never laughed. She merely let the corners of her mouth turn up. But Hilda laughed like someone who had thought hard about life and seen the joke. Start tomorrow anyway. I've got a room at home. You can stay with me. And tomorrow you'll have the light. We wouldn't want to presume, said Granny. Nonsense. Now why don't I have a look around while I pack up the stall? Okay. So it seems that Es and Granny are about to be on their way to the great city of the disc. Thank you all for stopping back in, the Fables and Fury. Hope your day was fantastic. Hope tomorrow's going to be good too. Love you. See you soon.